You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. RX Radio, episode something. We're in the 400s now, which is incredible to me. That's a lot of hours of talking into the internet that yourself, myself, the Jameses, and Shallow, and various other guests have been doing. And there's still people listening, I think more than ever, which is amazing. So thank you guys for being here. And thank you for listening to us say the things that have been in our brain that we don't really have anyone else to say it to on the internet for years now. Um, Before we dive into it, I have Killian Hamilton here with me. We've been doing a series of podcasts based around the course that he is providing for us starting next week, Hyundai Online Skill Acquisition. That will be July 24th. It is a coaching course, is what it is. Diving into theoretical models around skill learning and how to implement that into your coaching. We'll dive into that in a little more detail. Killian can describe it much better than I can because he created this course. But I want to give everyone a heads up that we do have the in-person component to this for the first time ever in Toronto live. That is the 22nd and 23rd. And with that, you will be granted admission to the online course for the following 8 weeks that starts that Monday. So that's the major thing we have coming up right now through Prescript. So head over to the website, www.pre-script.com, if you guys are interested. Aside from that, we have a free ebook launching. It's called our Coach's Field Guide. That is also available on our email list. So head over to the website if you guys are interested in that. And then we have the Prescript Level 1, our flagship course, launching again in September, kind of the everything you need to know to start your coaching career off on the right foot. As we get into this, I'll stop with the salesy stuff. And Killian and I just had a conversation before we hit record about what the skill acquisition course is. And the way that he describes it is as a coaching course. So we've gone back and forth about this for, I don't know, weeks, months, years now. This has been something that Killian's been preaching for a long time and helping other coaches understand for a long time. So maybe let's start there. I know that as you've gone through this course, Killian, you've kind of defined it in different ways, and it seems like you've kind of come to a realization lately that this is a coaching course. Can you maybe describe how you got to that?
Yeah. So for the longest time, I think we've all gone back and forth, and me personally, I've gone back and forth with myself in being able to give someone, I guess, the elevator pitch on what is skill acquisition. And a large part of that struggle is the initial weeks of the course are more long form, and we cover a lot of the history and the first principles of where this skill acquisition model came from. And the interesting thing about skill acquisition is it's not a conceptual or a theoretical model. It's very much a practical and applicable model that, whether or not we're aware of it, we apply and has been and is a model that's been applied to all of us at some point in our lives. Anytime we've gone to learn something that requires some type of motor skill, some types of hands-on skill, the skill acquisition model that was created by Fitz and Posner back in the 60s was the model we used to learn. We learned something on a cognitive or theoretical basis. We learned the first principles of it, how it's described to us, the history of it, kind of like how the beginning of the skill acquisition course starts. We're then associated with it. We're given a controlled task in which we get to learn and experiment with how this thing is done, whatever it is we're trying to learn: music, cooking, singing, playing football, running. And then we're given homework, an autonomous task in which we can take it home, and with the knowledge that whoever is instructing us is confident we have, we can go home with this autonomous work and get good quality practice in. It's the way you learn in an organized educational system, is using this skill acquisition model. The way anybody who takes our courses learned math, it was probably taught using the same system. The way you learned how to play baseball, the way you learned how to wrestle, the way I learned how to run, was all using this same model. So I think, one of my bigger struggles personally, I don't want to put it on anybody else, but one thing I'm coming to the realization of now, and I'm even more passionate about with this course, is, this isn't someone asked me the other day, they're like, I'm interested to know if skill acquisition is something that would benefit the people I work with. And quite frankly, if you're not using the skill acquisition model, you're probably finding a lot of obstacles when it comes to benefiting anyone you do work with. Because
Right.
if you're working with an adult, they've been raised their entire life through development to use this model to learn. And if we're not still using that model of learning in the gym, we're discounting any of the efforts us as trainers and coaches and clinicians or our clients are actually putting into a session.
Yeah. Unreal. And I think a parallel I made with you off air, a parallel that makes a lot of sense to me is in describing where this fits into someone's coaching career is actually using the skill acquisition model in itself is cognitive, associative, and then the autonomous phase is that if we make a parallel and make an analogy, right? If we want to go play football, first, that kind of cognitive phase of this is that we need to know what football is, right? We need to understand that football is a thing that people play, right? And that's that's kind of how this starts out is okay. All right, we understand this thing exists. And from there, we need some sort of buy-in, right? We need to get some sort of certification. I'm sorry, I'm taking it to coaching. We need to understand the rules of the game, right?
Yeah.
We need to understand the rule book of football. All right, how do people play? What are the bounds that make this game what it is? Because football is different than basketball. There's different rules. We play it differently. So we need to understand that. And then once we understand the rules, then we need to put it into practice. We need to actually learn the skill of playing football. And kind of in coaching, the way that I see the parallel to this is first off, we need to understand that we're going to do coaching as our career. We need something that breaks down that barrier of entry. We need some sort of base level certification, right? That's going to get us in the door here. And then from there, the actual rule book to coaching is going to be the anatomy and the biomechanics, right? That's going to dictate the way that we train. If we don't understand these things, then we can't really make the proper associations between this person has this goal and these are the exercises that are going to get them there. And then that last phase is actually practicing coaching. We need to learn the skill itself of coaching. So that's kind of in the skill acquisition model. The way I understand this fitting in is that okay, we need to be certified to be a coach. That's step 1. Then we need to understand what we're working with. We need to understand humans and how they move and how exercise works and how it gets us the adaptations that we're looking for. And then once we understand that, that's all buy-in to now being a coach. And skill acquisition is what actually teaches us the skill of coaching. That's the way that I look at this.
100%, and I don't want to go back and forth trading analogies, but I think another analogy that helps trainers understand where skill acquisition fits into their educational pathway as valuable is better understanding how they can start to grade um, strength and conditioning principles. And you had brought up biomechanics and anatomy or the rule book. Well, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you're going to get a driver's license. You know,
Mm-hmm.
biomechanics and anatomy is your driver's license to license you to be on the road responsibly.
Right.
You need to go, you need to learn the rules of the road, you need to understand the speed limit, what all the signs mean. Then you need to get in the car with probably someone who's not the greatest driver themselves, but found out that they couldn't do any other career and they work at the DMV now and they follow you around in a little car. You
What a
need to sit
miserable
with them
fate.
and they need to watch that you can drive around in a circle and you're good to go. That's kind of the entry point for a lot of people into fitness, right? They take a 2-day course, they go through driver's ed of being a personal trainer, sits with them at the end and goes, you're safe enough to be on the road as a personal trainer. Biomechanics and anatomy aren't unimportant. They're actually so important. They're what quote unquote licenses you to actually be able to responsibly work with people. It
Right.
is the most important first principle of what we all do. Like you said, it is the rule book. But just being able to drive your car legally on the road with a license doesn't make you a Formula One race car driver.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge gap between me driving on the road and Lewis Hamilton driving around a track. And that skill gap, it's a skill gap. It's not an
Mm-hmm.
experience gap. Me and Lewis Hamilton could have got our licenses on the same day and we could both drive. And
Mm-hmm.
this is where we need to identify, is it experience or is it skill? Is it intentional experience? And that's the same thing with your client. We run into people every day in the gym that go, I've been working out for 20 years. And you go, not with any kind of intention. There's been
Yes.
no skilled experience, right? No intentional experience has been had. That's a person who lacks the skill. Same thing with coaches. I worked in a commercial gym. I worked alongside people who were a personal trainer, a strength conditioning coach for 30, 40 years. I saw a lot of things I didn't like about what they did. They weren't intentional with their experience. So being able to use that car driving analogy, it's like we can both spend 10 years on the road. But what defines someone from being an F1 driver and someone who struggles to get to the grocery store without getting into a 5-car pileup is the skill gap.
Hmm.
And that's when intentional learning or skill acquisition plays an immense role in performance for your client and for you as a coach. If you as a coach can understand the skill acquisition model, well, then you can go on to take whatever course you want after in any discipline you want. And you can actually learn the information you're getting because you understand the system in which you learn. You can now start to sit there and rather than being overwhelmed with all this new information that you might agree, disagree with, understand, or not understand, you can start to compartmentalize it and go, well, how am I going to go through this education and get something valuable out of it? And, I think that's what skill acquisition provides. In one sense, it provides the obvious benefit of it is the tried and true program design. There is no program design. There's the skill acquisition model, and then there's 5 people who arbitrarily change it a little bit. So it's like skill acquisition is the program design you're going to use for your clients, and on top of that, it's the mode of learning you're going to use for any kind of self-directed study in your adulthood.
Yeah. I really like that. And it's funny that you mentioned that you had a hard time giving the elevator pitch on skill acquisition because I was actually at a wedding not too long ago and someone asked me what I did. And a lot of times I just tell them I'm a personal trainer because people
Yeah.
understand that. And there's no follow-up questions. They're like, okay, this guy makes people exercise for a living. But this person had a little bit deeper understanding of what I did. So they asked, like, what is prescript? So the way that I described it to them and the way that kind of this conversation is pertinent to it is that we're not going to give you a system of exercises. We're going to teach you how the human body works and the principles that apply to strength and conditioning and learning in this context that are going to allow you to apply that to anyone with any goal, right? And that's exactly fitting this analogy. That's We're going to give you the rule book, right? We'll teach you the principles of anatomy. We'll teach you the principles of biomechanics. We'll teach you programming principles. We'll teach you principles of nutrition, sport performance, body composition, and we'll teach you how to learn. And we'll teach you how to teach people how to learn. And all these things compile on top of each other to make you an effective coach because there's different facets to that, right? There's people that can maybe specialize in a very kind of small portion of the industry, right? And maybe that's all they have the capacity to do, all they care to do. Is that there's people that will be in that kind of good life or 24-hour fitness like personal training setting, and that is personal training to them. That is through their lens. That's all that will ever be. And they could take people off the street and they could give them an exercise and make them tired. And then they'll come back and do that for life. But the more deeply that you understand this process and you understand how to apply this process, it just broadens your scope in terms of being a coach and being a personal trainer. So a personal trainer could be, yes, that, but I guess that's the difference between maybe just someone who's just a personal trainer and someone who's actually a coach. Is there's a lot of different variables to being a coach. And once you understand how to properly digest different movements, movement patterns, different skills and associate that in the proper way, is that you can take people from so let me take a step back. Is that basically our goal is to take people from point A to point B, whatever that might be. So on a low level, that might be from sitting on the couch to being able to go for a hike on the weekend. At the
Mhm.
top level, that might be someone who does ultra marathons and they want to shave 2 minutes off their time, right? Is the further we take this to the greater extent to this is we have to be more accurate in this process and we have to understand it more deeply because each of these variables is going to become that much more important. So that's what skill acquisition does. It allows you to ascend through the ranks of I can take this population from point A to point B to is I understand how to take a human from point A to point B, whatever that starting point and that ending point is.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there, discerning what a personal trainer and what a coach is. And I would look at that as what we see people that come through Prescript understand as skill and as output. A
Right.
personal trainer's entire focus is on output. I know. I was a personal trainer for a long time. You
Hmm.
have 60 minutes with someone. They're probably going to see you 120 minutes a week. They're going to come in for 2 1-hour sessions. Maybe
Right.
at the gym you work at, they come in for 2 30-minute sessions. Your job is to create output in that amount of time. Why is it to create output? You don't have time to do much else. You know they're probably not going to work out on their own. They're not going to intentionally practice anything on their own. And you know that they paid you to get a very clear, oftentimes physiological result from working with you. So they come in and your entire onus is on output. You're not a coach, you're a personal trainer. You're output driven, which is great. And like you said, that's where you live. And that is extremely important to know how to do. But when you want to move on to coaching, coaching implies there's a skill involved because coaching implies that there's a hands on element to what you do and that you yourself have an intrinsic owned value in what you see as a coach.
Right.
If you're going to coach someone, you're going to take them to something that's probably, like you said, a higher level of performance or skill. And there's a value that you have that can't be described by, it's 2023, Chat GPT. Chat GPT isn't coaching. Chat GPT could be artificially intelligent program design, but at the end of the day, it'll never be coaching. It doesn't know what your A skip looks like. It doesn't know if you turn over late in the snatch. It doesn't know if you bend your elbows early. So it's like personal trainers will be obsolete when Chat GPT learns to not write everything in MLA format. Personal trainers will be obsolete 100%.
Right.
But coaches will never be overtaken by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, there's that abstract component, and it's the way that I think of this too is what makes up a coach. Kind of as I went through that kind of three-tiered
Yeah.
model, is that we go through and as we get into coaching, there's an evidence-based component to this in the way that I look at it. Right? There's going to be a couple of different pillars that inform our coaching that we're going to have to pull from each of those at different times, and one of those is just going to be experience. Right? Working with clients, like you said, is do you have intentional learning in that span of experience? Like the professional race car driver versus 16-year-old kid who got their license. Okay, maybe those two people got their license at the same time, but there was a different intention around the experiences that they had, right? And that's something that you can't necessarily outsource to AI. That's not an algorithm, right? That's something that it lives between your ears, and you're going to have to fine tune your skill of coaching over time towards the performance that you want to get or the skills that you want to teach. And then aside from that, there's always going to be the kind of scientific principles, right? There's going to be literature, there's going to be research that should be informing us to some degree. If there's a bunch of data that says that, I don't fucking know, what's a hot thing, that ice baths are shit.
Yeah.
Okay, then maybe we shouldn't be suggesting ice baths. And that's just, that insert anything there. Ice baths are just dumb and they're really popular right now. So we should be using information and science to inform the decisions that we're making as we have this intentional learning in our experience. And then outside of this is the one that always throws like a wrench into the cogs, is that your client values and client goals, right?
Yeah.
Is we can never dictate those things. That's always going to be dictated by the client. Is that I can't say that you have a stupid goal. I can't say that, to keep this personal, is that running 100 meters really fast is a stupid goal, and say I want you to snatch
Yeah.
150 kilos instead. That doesn't work. You can't impose those things on your clients. So you have to work within the bounds of what your clients give you. And I think the more honed your skill of coaching is, those two things start to align much better, right? In that general personal training setting, you're going to get people with all kinds of abstract goals. I had a client that wanted to do a human flag and like a strict muscle up. And I'm like, all right, we'll make you stronger at pulling things and pushing things and doing body weight shit and build awareness around that stuff, because I have the tools. Like I understand the qualities that they need to have to do those things, but that's not my specialty, right? I consider myself a weightlifting coach and a clinician. So I can make you not feel pain and I can make you better at weightlifting. Those are my two areas of expertise. And the better I get at that, the more I'm going to attract people that want those outcomes. So that's kind of this bubble of coaching, is how we inform the decisions that we make that can't really be outsourced. And I think that the most abstract part of that we can't really, like, a lot of this stuff we can define, we can
Yeah.
pull information from Google, we can understand client values and goals. But the more abstract portion of that is, how are we treating the experiences along the way, right? I've been in this profession, I've been training 12, 13 years now. I've been training myself like 22 years now.
Yeah.
So it's the experiences that have compiled in that amount of time are what shaped my thought process around this. And I can't go to Chat GPT and I can't say, oh, in this scenario, I did a snatch and I dove my torso forward and I cracked myself in the forehead and I was gushing blood out of my face. Like, let's tell someone to not do that. Like, we have to understand the chains of events that maybe are a little bit more abstract, or they're hard to put an objective measure on, that we pick up on as coaches and we learn from those. And those are the things that compile to make that experience so abstract.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a really important point about like what is abstract about coaching, right? And the most abstract portion of coaching that I think nowadays, a large majority of the people that are coaches in the fitness industry, and this isn't meant in a condescending way, but the large majority of people that are coaches in the fitness industry nowadays are probably within their first 3 to 5 years of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
The industry has exploded, right? The amount of newer coaches far overshadows the amount of people like you or I that might have a decade's worth of time in this.
Yeah.
And that's probably more so because the people that started, at least a decade ago, like you or I, have just quit because it's really hard to survive in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's why there isn't many people, just because it was difficult. And there's a few people that hung around to see what came of it. And I'm glad for the most part the people that hung around did. But in looking at that, it's understanding what is the most abstract portion of coaching. You kind of touched on it. It's the human element. You're dealing with a client.
Right.
And a client is in all of the chaos in your job is the other human you interact with. Like you said, exercises I can look up, program design I can Google. My client's goal of doing a human flag, not ever will I know that they're going to say that to me.
Right.
I had a client, 6'6", 320 pounds. His goal was to jump off of a turnbuckle, get hit with a steel chair, and then throw a grown man out of a ring. That's a
Pretty
really
abstract.
chaotic goal. Very
Yeah.
abstract that this is what he flies on. He takes 4 flights a week at his size. And he has less than 24 hours to get in a ring. It's like, okay,
Wow.
this is a chaotic person with a chaotic goal. And that's the human element. And when we look around, and I'm going to say this, when you look around at our part of the industry where we were coaches and now we're educators and coaches, when I look around at education, it wouldn't take me more than one hand to count the amount of education available that touches on the human element of what we do.
Right.
Biomechanics is, unfortunately, to be honest with you, is not the human element.
Right.
Anatomy is not the human element. Yes, humans have skeletons, but there's no human element to anatomy. People have skeletons hanging in the back corner of their office and they give it a silly name to humanize it, but that person doesn't have a brain. They don't have lived experience. They don't have controlled beliefs. And it erases the human element. And when you look around, we have PSL1, incredible course in biomechanics and anatomy. I enjoy teaching it so much. And me and Shallow add the human element. We're entertaining and we use life experience to paint the picture of why what we say has some kind of value or matters. L2, and so on. We have all these courses that live in the theoretical, and luckily they're taught by people who have a wealth of knowledge in the human side of things. So you can take information like resistance profile and strength curve, and you can go, I had this experience with someone once, and this is why it matters. And you give it a name, and you give it a story, and you paint the picture. But there's little education out there that takes into account there's a human element. And a large portion of the cognitive lectures in the skill acquisition course touch on something called controlled belief. And your example of bringing up ice baths is a great idea. We need to be able to communicate with our client when our client says something like, oh man, I love doing an ice bath. Well, as a coach, whether or not ice baths are good or bad, you need to understand what the consequence of an ice bath is. You need to have enough knowledge to know what the consequence of that decision is, but you need to have enough EQ, emotional intelligence, to understand that for this athlete, that might be a controlled belief that they can't get past.
Yes.
Dude, you and I talked about the bead stick,
The bead stick.
the
It's not a
foam
sex
rolling
thing.
bead stick.
Yes.
And it's like, I bring that thing to the track all the time. I won't listen to anybody who tells me foam rolling doesn't work because they just haven't trained hard enough to know that foam rolling works when you need it to work.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in research. I'm not interested in what split squat would be better for me long term. I have to run 6x120. And if I don't rub this bead stick on my legs, I'm going to have a brain aneurysm.
That's so funny.
Like I have 2.5 grams of caffeine in my body. I'm
Let's go.
shaking. I really just need to rub this thing on my legs. And I need to get some level of external discomfort so that I can ignore how bad my ankles feel. And then I can get through this run and I can break down at home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can take this morning off. I ran last night. I haven't moved from my couch until we had to do this podcast. It's the first time I got up today.
Yeah.
But it's like the bead stick matters, and I won't listen to anyone who tells me it doesn't.
Yeah.
And you need to understand when your client comes into that session, they go, thinking about doing an ice bath at the end of our session. I've heard it feels really good. You need to be able to check yourself and go, what does the ice bath mean to my client? What's the consequence of me telling them it's not good? What do I need to know about ice baths so I can change what I'm responsible for so that the ice bath doesn't have a negative consequence?
That's a very accurate way to look at this. And it, in my mind, it breaks into two different conversations that I've had. One with the weightlifting club that I coach, and one with my therapist.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll keep it a little more weightlifting for now, but it's when people miss a lift, right? Especially when you're testing, things are heavy. They can miss you can boil it down to two reasons. It
Yeah.
can be you don't have the physical capability to make that lift, or you don't have the mental capability to make that lift. And that's the unknown. That's the human component of this, right? There's emotion there. And the conversation I've had with my therapist is logic versus emotion, right? These two
Yes.
things operate in two completely different universes. And the way that they interplay is that they inform each other in real life, right? It's computers are very logical. Humans are very emotional, right?
Yeah.
We can make a computer program that would make you and I very successful on paper, we would have lots of money, we would, have the perfect wife and the perfect family with the white picket fence, if that's the definition of success as outlined by client values. But in real world, emotion is going to fuck that up. Like I can write out a progression for you to every 12 weeks increase your 1 rep max back squat by 3 to 5% for the rest of your life, and you'll be the strongest person on earth by the time you're 85. But that's not plausible. That's not how the real world works. So the coaching aspect of this is we need to understand how emotion informs logic and logic informs emotion, and we need to be able to interpret that through our experience of dealing with that time after time. Like I started off really bad at this because I still am, and this is why relationships haven't worked out in the past. I'm very logical. I'm painfully
Same, dude.
logical. Yeah. And that transfers into how I train and how I train other people, right? Is if I believe, and this is also part of the emotional side of it, is that if I believe that I logically should be able to do this based on the information that I have at hand, then I'm going to fucking do it. I'm going to make it happen. But there's people where that logic and that emotion, it doesn't interplay that same way, right? They don't have as much information through the logical side of things. So they're maybe more informed by the emotional side of things, is that this is how I feel today. A lot of athletes, we can say they don't give a fuck how they feel. And like,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's happened to you. I'm sure it's happening to you literally right now, is that
Yeah.
you're probably performing close to your best and you probably feel close to your worst, right? And
Entirely.
that's performance, right? And that's your ability to rely on that logic, is that training dictates that I should be able to do this, and shut down the emotional side of things. And not everyone has the ability to do that. Even high level athletes, a lot of times you'll see like it's very prominent in weightlifters. I've seen it a ton of times in like professional athlete. Like I think a good example would be Simone Biles at the 2020/2021 Olympics. She
Yeah.
withdrew from the Olympics. And like I think there was some reason for like emotional distress when she is objectively, logically, on paper, probably the best gymnast that will ever live, at
Yeah.
least in our lifetime, which says that the logic dictates that she should get gold in every event that she enrolls in. but there's the emotional side of things that you need to be able to manage, and you need to be able to meet somewhere in between so that you can manage both of those things and create the best possible outcome. And that's coaching. That's something that AI will never be able to do.
Yeah, well, you touch on a really good point. And for everybody listening, what you're describing is something we actually know to exist. The portion of the brain that controls sense of agency is described as one's belief in their ability to change themselves or the environment around themselves. This is literally the first lecture in skill acquisition. The first thing we
Amazing.
identify, because it's a client focused system, it's a client focused course. Your cerebellum houses your sense of agency, your confidence, your belief in yourself to change yourself for the environment around you. You said if you logically believe that you can do something, you can train well towards it. You have a greater likelihood of success because the cerebellum is also the portion of the brain that largely controls for motor output and coordination.
Mm-hmm.
And the lesser we believe in ourselves, our ability to coordinate complex tasks actually goes down. That's why when people are going through grief, anxiety, feelings of depression, overwhelming senses of doom, they move slower or don't move at all. If anyone's ever woke up and life hits everybody hard, it's hit you hard, it's hit me hard, you've lost a loved one, you don't have any money in your bank account is a big one. You don't want to move. You just want to sit.
Yeah.
Because that's the portion of your brain that makes you feel like you're confident enough to do anything you want. It's also the portion of your brain that informs the ability for you to actually physically do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So with our clients, we first need to be able to address what is this person's sense of agency, right? What is the quality of their confidence when it comes to completing the task? This is like a big question in motivational interviewing, which a lot of people might have experience in. Addiction counseling uses motivational interviewing. Personal trainers have used motivational interviewing forever. It's the idea of on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can change? What obstacles do you see affecting you? How confident are you that we can get around these obstacles? With your client, the first thing we need to identify is how confident is this person that they can achieve this? You and me are both very logical. We both have therapists. My therapist just last week said to me, "You do a great job leading with logic in highly emotional situations." And I said, "Thanks." And he said, "That's not a compliment.
Yeah.
You're completely emotionally unintelligent." And I went, "All right then." But when
How
it
do I
comes
fix
to you,
that?
yeah, but when it comes to you and I
Right.
being athletes, starters, never
Right.
riding the bench because it's like it doesn't matter what the task is. 8 weeks ago, I signed up for a 100-meter race in Ontario, the largest province in Canada. And I was like, yeah, I can do it. I can learn how to do a block start and run 100 meters not embarrassingly fast. Because logically, I can break down the steps it takes to learn that. I know cognitively what it takes. I watch the videos. I've bought the books. I listen to podcasts on my way to the track. I watch YouTube track before I run. I film my running. I know what the positions are. I know what the joint angles are. I know what the science is behind training for it. I know I can go out to the gym 3 times a week. And the other thing that I think a lot of people disregard is I have a job and I can pay my rent. And
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest stresses for people. And honestly, I was a way worse athlete when I had no money and I was sleeping on a basement floor in a sleeping bag or in a bathtub trying to do bobsled and run fast than I am now. I have a job. I can go to the track as many days a week as I like. I have the keys to 2 private gyms in the city I can go train at, and I can come hang out with my best friend on Iris and talk shit.
Yeah.
My life is great. My confidence in my ability to do anything is sky high.
Beautiful.
And it's like every time I go train, my progress goes like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have, like you said, I have that belief in myself. I don't go to the track at a -10 and spend half my workout convincing myself I can do it. I get to the track and I'm like a Doberman. And I'm just like, let the leash off and let me run fast. And then what my programming is putting all these obstacles in my way so I don't go out every day and do that. Run on a different surface, wear different shoes, don't put my spikes on yet, only run 2-point stance. There's all these subjective means of constraining me as the athlete because I'm a high confidence athlete. Now, if you have a low confidence client and not a high confidence athlete, that's where you step in as the coach with your skill acquisition skills and you go, this is not a client I constrain. Shallow made a thread the other day about using constraints when you're weak. And sometimes that's not when a constraint is necessary. When you're weak, it's take off the constraint. Let that person go. Give them a way to go. Don't constrain them. You have a high confidence athlete, maybe that's when you put the leash back on. So, skill acquisition is exactly what you just said. It is the human element, is the abstract of coaching. But it's so abstract that it's literally the only thing that matters when it comes to coaching. It's if you can't create buy-in with your client, if you can't create adherence with your client, and most of all in our line of work, if you can't create the confidence in your client that they can do the thing, then none of the things that you think are important are ever going to apply if they never show up to do them.
Yeah. I love that this all comes back to confidence too, because that's the biggest thing that I've seen in determining progress in clients is putting them in positions where I know that they're going to have increased
Yeah.
confidence, right? It starts with an assessment, right? I'm going to assess where you're strong and where you're weak. And I'm going to play into both of those when I need to, right? We're going to do the things that bring your weaknesses up. And we're going to do that in the background, in the quiet. And that's something that you as the client, may not understand what's happening there. And it may not be something that we put much importance on in your training because I want to put the importance on the things that are going to build your confidence, right? So I'm going to put things in place at the right times where it's like, all right, we're going to work hard here. I know this one kind of sucks. Don't worry about that. And then we're going to do the thing that you're really good at. And I'm going to hype you up as you do that. But in my mind, like, all right, we're going to do it for like 6, 8 weeks. And then I'm going to bring back in a test that shows them their objective improvement in this area that they were really deficient at earlier on in training. And they don't know, maybe we haven't done that move or anything that looks exactly like that in a while, but we've been doing things that are going to make them better at that. And then we can actually build their confidence, is that they had this low level of confidence, understanding, oh, no, I'm not a good squatter, or I have really bad stability, or my lunges suck. So we did a bunch of things to build up those qualities. And now when we test it again, they're like, oh, wait, I'm actually pretty good at this. And then you start to build their confidence. You get that buy-in, and you can understand that process with this type of model, is that if you can destruct the thing that they don't have confidence in, and you can sprinkle it in a way that's going to them to build that skill, whether they know it or not, and then you can retest and build their confidence there, then they're going to be much more willing to have progress in that area in the future. So that's kind of like the like psychology, I guess, behind this, is that you can get into their head and you can manipulate their confidence levels in a positive way by understanding how you can get them to have progress in these areas. And it's funny because we went down that whole like logic, emotion
Yeah.
side of things, and you definitely see this manifest in like the coaching space if you pay attention. It's like there's like AI weightlifting programs, which
Yeah.
is, if you talk to Matt Penny, it's not actual AI, it's machine learning, which there is a difference that I cannot explain to you.
Yeah.
But and then there's on the far other side of that, like the emotional side, there's like mindset, mentality coaches, people that like are just there to like pump you up and build your confidence. And this is in my mind, like something I deal with often is me in the realm of rehab versus like traditional medicine, like going to an MD and like getting a painkiller or
Yeah.
getting an image and getting referred for surgeries. That these two things operate almost independent of each other, and there needs to be an interplay there, right? It's not one or the other. I mean, some people will resonate more with one or the other, but there has to be in between these two things. We need to understand the mindset, and we need to understand the logic that's going to dictate the actual principles that are going to apply to get that person to progress. And that's exactly what that's this. This is coaching.
Yeah. And I think it's just so important, especially like you said, it's so important nowadays to talk about in the landscape that is fitness, strength and conditioning, whatever words you want to describe for what we do, even rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much information available. If I want to get the objectively right answer to something, I
Yes.
can find that right away. But here's the problem is if you want the objectively right answer to something, not only can you find it, literally anybody can.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ability to discern the experienced and qualified coach versus someone who's really good at what you're describing, machine learning, those two things are really hard to discern if you don't know what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that subjective quality comes in, right? Like you mentioned machine learning. Machine learning is being exposed to essentially so many outcomes of a certain problem that you start to stack and organize most likely outcomes of something. Okay, we tried this 10 times, 9 times it went left, 2 times it went right. Now the machine knows it just goes left.
Mm-hmm.
The better chance it's going to be left than it ever will be right. That machine learns that input of information. Well, anybody can input a quality search into Google and come up with an objectively right answer. But a coach is going to be able to sit down with somebody and not look at what the objectively right answer to their question is, but they're able to go, okay, Junta wants to do this. Every time somebody who has shown up, said the same thing Junta said, has the same experience Junta's had, has had these opinions that Junta's had, has gone with this really well, and when I use this, it goes really bad. So it's like, I need to go this direction. And, skill acquisition allows you on a micro level in a session, on a macro level over the course of a block of programming, and over the course of, in my hope, the many years you work with one person, to begin to machine learn those decisions. Okay, every time I give them this exercise, they overshoot. At this time of the year, this is happening external to the gym, their performance plummets. Big friend of the show, Brandon Tran, client of mine, powerlifter, going to school to be a physiotherapist. What's the number one thing I ask him? I say, can you share with me your schedule for school?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And regardless of when he's competing, I don't program around when his meet is. I program around when his exams are. And if his competition so happens to happen during exams, his lead up to the meet, his peak for that meet, has nothing to do with what a traditional peak would look like. It has to do with what training around exams and physiotherapy school are supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's where, as a coach, that's something AI doesn't ask you for. It doesn't say, what's your work schedule? It doesn't say when you're going away.
Yeah.
It doesn't say, oh, can you pay your rent this month or not? What do we need to do in this session? A good client, Gloria, she's a yoga teacher. We can all assume, stereotypical yoga teacher, pretty relaxed, pretty like go with the flow, all about energy and moving slow, really great at breathing. Breathing is really great. But the other day she rode her bike. I train her in person. She's actually somebody I spend an hour with a week in person. She rode her bicycle from one side of downtown Toronto to the other side of downtown Toronto. And I know you used to ride a motorcycle, go to Palmer. And it's like, imagine what it would be like to ride a pedal bike across a downtown metropolitan city. She showed up to the
Toronto
session.
Traffic.
Yeah, you've been in Toronto traffic. Dude,
Yeah.
She was not a yoga teacher that day.
Yeah.
I thought somebody had her at gunpoint outside. And it was like, in that split second, I had to go, we're not starting with snatch and back squat. That's not how this session starts. This person is in no condition to learn right now. So I needed to pivot and go, what's going to bring this person's energy down? Do we need to, create arousal? Do we need to create cognitive and physical arousal? No. Do we need to bring this person back down? Do we need to inhibit a ton of sensory information? Great. So we're at the gym. I train her one-on-one in a private facility. We turn the lights off. We turn the music off. We went through things that challenged her stability, from isometric exercises to stability-based single leg exercises to plyometrics. And then by the time we got to plyometrics, she had already relaxed. She was into it. She was talking. She was in a positive space. And then we could use those plyos to begin to bring that arousal up. And then we just started adding load to where she couldn't jump off the ground anymore. And she started lifting weights. But it was in that moment as a trainer, can you have somebody walk in and in a 3-minute conversation assess, today's not 1 rep max snatch day. In fact, the consequence of going for a PR today, because the program says it, is this person may never show back up to the gym.
Right.
If they miss their 100% today, they're never coming back.
Yeah. And that brings a point to my mind that I think needs to be said out loud, is that artificial intelligence is artificial. We're training computers to work like a human brain. And we have real intelligence. We have this shit that it's modeled off of in between our ears. So let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Right? Is that yes, there is human error, and that's going to be a big part of any process, but that's the learning process in itself, right? Is that kind of how I was saying earlier, is that when I started off as a trainer, when you started too, I'm sure, is that you weren't as good at making these decisions.
No,
That, that
terrible.
pro- right, that process that you just outlined, that's a refined thought process over time.
Yeah,
So you have the actual intelligence, whether that's, you know, logical intelligence, emotional intelligence. You can interact with this person. You can visually look at them. You can listen to them. You can hear the tone of their voice, interpret the things that they're saying, and you can make actionable decisions based off of that in real time.
yeah,
That's what we're talking about here. No computer's ever going to be able to do that. And that's this process, right? Is we need to refine that process. But for us to be able to refine that process, we need intention around it. And I think
yeah,
the words you used earlier in this conversation was intentional learning, right? That's what this is, right? It's
yeah,
not machine learning, it's real learning, it's human brain learning, and we need
yeah.
intention around that. And no compute. So maybe this is a good point to make too, is that there's different ways to use chat gpt,
100%.
artificial intelligence, and two people can have, say, the same objective outcome is build me an exercise program, but the person that understands how to use the software better is going to get a better result to get to that goal versus someone that just types in, build me an exercise program to make my 1 rep max squatter. And then it'll do whatever it has to meet that criteria versus someone that has real intelligence and has done this before can say, I want a squat program where I squat 2 days a week, back squat 2 days a week, front squat 1 day a week. And I want ancillary unilateral work to support the back squats. And I want it to wave intensity every 3 weeks with a 1 week deload. And it can build out maybe a much better program. But the difference is the human input, right? Is
Yeah,
if I understand how to better prompt this machine, I'm going to get a better result or maybe a more efficient, more complete result versus the person that just types in build me a squat program, right?
yeah,
So it's this stuff doesn't just work, right? You need human input and you need to understand the process and what you're going for so that you can get better results. And that's never going to go away. And you're not just going to learn that stuff, or that's not just going to be available. Maybe machine learning will pick up over time, but there's always going to be gaps that need to be filled that you cannot fill unless you have intentional learning, you have experience, and you've worked face to face with clients, and you understand how that emotion informs the logic.
yeah. And I think, we could have sat down and had this conversation 4 years ago and probably not come to such a good answer as we did today. And I wish we would have
Absolutely.
still tried at least. But, I think you hit the nail on the head with it, which it circles back to what do we do at Prescript? We don't give you the answers, but we help you ask better questions. And skill acquisition is not for a coach who has no idea how to train someone. It's not for someone who doesn't have a handle on biomechanics. It's not for someone who doesn't have a handle on anatomy. It's not for somebody who is confident lifting themselves.
Mhm.
But it is for coaches. It is for people who know biomechanics. It is for people who can recite to me every bone in the hand. It is the course for people who are comfortable under a barbell. Because what it is it's the course for those people who have answered every theoretical question there is to answer, but what they
Mhm.
don't have is the list of human questions to answer. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, skill acquisition gives you the answers to that question of what if I train my client at 5 a.m.? What if I train them at 5 p.m.? What if I train them on Monday? What if I train them on Saturday? What if they're 50 years old and their training age is 1 year? What if they're 16 years old and their training age is 4 years?
Yeah.
What's their job? Do they have rent money? Are they a student athlete? Are they
Yeah.
a working professional? Skill acquisition gives you the answers to those questions. And when you become a coach, when you leave being a trainer, when you leave being a guy who helps out your cousin with a program, when you become a coach, the answers you're looking for are what do I do with this client if this week I have to train them at 5 a.m.?
Yep.
What do I do with this client who just lost their job and they're going to be here in an hour? What do I do with my client who just broke his hand at the track by punching someone? What do I do with that? What do I do with the guy who taped all his fingers together so he can snatch and
Yeah.
now he can't do anything else?
I know
It
that guy.
answers those questions. And I think as a coach, if you are a coach and you're listening to this, I'm sure the questions that you're looking for answers on are those questions. I'm sure you don't need to know what a good quad exercise is. I'm sure you don't need to know another option for a shoulder exercise. I'm sure the questions you're asking now aren't questions you can type into Google. They're questions where you're looking to reach out to someone who has real world knowledge, and you're looking to say, what would you do if? And if you are starting to see that your questions are, what would you do if? That's when you know you're ready for skill acquisition.
Yeah. And the best scenario I can think of to describe this is a client that I know you've worked with, I've worked with, and says the best things about the skill acquisition course. Kyle Rogers, shout out
Yeah.
Kyle fucking Rogers, working in private S&C for baseball, got a hold of the skill acquisition principles, really took off with them. And now he is, I always forget his job title and I always butcher it, but I believe he's the integrated performance pitching coach for the New York Mets. So
Yep.
this is something that propelled his career. And I hate to put words in his mouth, but I think he would completely agree with this, is understanding these principles. Just, it connects a lot of dots, right? And that's the way that I think of it too, is that these are things that maybe you have had thoughts either subconscious or conscious of in the past, but you haven't really known how to organize them or how to tie them together or how they interplay in your brain. And then you take this course and it does. It really organizes them well, and it teaches you how to organize those thoughts and make them really actionable so that you can get better results with your clients.
Yeah, I think we hit the nail on the head today, and I'm happy to do it. It's a course that I am passionate about, and I hosted a lab this morning, and I said to everybody, I've been training for 10, 11 years now, training people. I've been an athlete my whole life, and if I look back on it in probably lesser quality ways, I've always tried to utilize this system. But it is something I'm confident in, and it's something, if I would look around right now at the fitness industry and go, what's missing? I think it's a better understanding of how we learn. I think, us at Prescript, and there's a lot of great resources out there, a lot of friends of ours that work outside of Prescript that have a ton of knowledge when it comes to biomechanics and anatomy, and they get really detailed, and it's exciting for me. I love learning that stuff because the more I try and move fast in one direction, the more I learn it's really just an expression of deep detailed biomechanics. But the only way I got to the point I'm at is first understanding how to learn, because I can't pick up a new interest every year and fuck it up. So yeah, I'm passionate about it. I'm glad we got to spend some time digging into it a bit deeper. But I think if we're to turn a new leaf going into the second half of 2023 and then going into 2024, it's putting away a lot of the titles we give ourselves, and just move towards client focused coaching.
Love it. I love it. So if you guys are interested, signups are open right now. Head over to the Prescript website, www.pre-script.com. Skill acquisition in person in Toronto, 22nd, 23rd of July. Starts online. You can access that worldwide on the 24th. That's a Monday here in North America. Maybe some other day if you're somewhere else in the world. But you'll have access to those lectures live. They get recorded and they get logged in your portal. So if you can't attend live, you'll get access to that lecture. You won't miss out. You also get access to Killian's lab sections and the Prescript Collective with that. So now is the time. Don't miss out on this class of Prescript Skill Acquisition with Killian Hamilton. If you guys want to talk to Killian, you can book a call with him directly through the Prescript website or reach out to him. Where's the best way to reach out to you, Killian?
Killian.Hamilton on Instagram, and also Killian.Hamilton on Threads now.
Oh man, see, I'm not buying in. I'm not gonna do the threads. I've thought of this. I'm not gonna do it unless they integrate it with the Instagram app. Then maybe I'll dabble, but I'm not down with other app. But
Dude,
reach out to Killian. He'll do
missing
it.
out
He'll
on a
dabble.
lot of crazy shit that I say.
So that does give me a little bit of FOMO, but I already have too much internet crazy shit in my life that I'm okay
That's
being
true.
ignorant for now. For every
That's fine.
positive that you put out there, I feel like there's going to be 10 negatives in my brain from
Oh
the
yeah.
other people in the world. So just block everyone else besides Killian Hamilton on Threads. Sign up for skill acquisition. Yeah, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
Anything to close on?
That's it, man. Take skill acquisition. Go take it
Cool.
now. www.pre-script.com. Take skill acquisition.
Done.